Well, Newt, I mean, people didn't know what to expect from Donald Trump, so there was a fear factor there. They just weren't sure.
Well, look, I think there's a huge difference. When Biden said don't, I made the point that 300 times, which is the number of missiles, or actually about 335 times, the Iranians did. Now, what's his response? I mean, he said don't to Putin. Putin ignored him and invaded Ukraine. He said don't to Iran. I mean, this administration has zero credibility in terms of keeping its word. And frankly, having 335 missiles and drones and other things fired at you is an act of complete warfare. Now, the Israelis could respond in a disciplined way. For example, they could take out the Iranian warship that's sitting in the Red Sea helping direct Houthi missiles. They could do a number of other steps that are targeted. But I'll be very surprised if Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to accept the failure of Biden's deterrence and then sit there and do nothing, because that invites the Iranians to figure out another way to attack Israel.
All right, let's take a short break and come back to this. Newt Gingrich, your reaction?
Well, look, I think Joe Biden has become a paper tiger. I mean, it doesn't matter what he says. You know, in the end, he won't do anything. He was a failure in Afghanistan. He's been a failure at ensuring that Ukraine has the resources. He's been a failure in terms of helping Israel. And I think to suggest that a country can launch over 300 missiles and drones and have no consequence, I think is very dangerous. I mean, remember, the Iranians are learning from this. The Chinese are learning from this. The Russians are learning from this. And if the message is the United States will help defensively, but by the way, you'll suffer no cost, you're just asking for more attacks and a greater danger. I think this is a very dangerous situation.
It really is. Morgan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with the Speaker Gingrich. You know, one of the things that was really interesting to me on Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening, I was obviously watching and monitoring this very closely, Maria, and literally the smoke had not cleared. We were still in the middle of the attacks, and we started to see the Biden Pentagon, the Biden White House starting to spin already what we heard throughout, what we later ended up hearing throughout the weekend, which was, oh, this isn't that big of a deal, you know, they missed, that sort of thing. I mean, it was unbelievable to me that the smoke had not cleared from the attacks, and we were already trying to tie Israel's hands behind their back as it relates to a response. Again, what was unprecedented about this attack was not just the number of drones and missiles used. That's a massive problem, as Speaker Gingrich pointed out. But what was a big problem was that this was the intent of this attack from inside Iran was to go and attack inside Israel. Listen, you've had Iran and Israel fighting it out in Syria, for example, for the last decade. That's something that we're used to. That's obviously where Israel in Damascus got the 4 IRGC generals that helped plan the October 7th attack, according to the Jerusalem Post. So they've been fighting it out in Syria. And of course, you'll have Hezbollah and Hamas that will do territorial incursions into Israel. But for Tehran itself to attack, and listen, I know their stuff failed because we have great air defenses and some of their stuff failed mid-flight, but for them to attempt and try to attack Israel territorially inside the borders is unprecedented. It brings up a new wave of the conflict. And this is why, by the way, let me just say, 3 years of pacifying and appeasing Iran, giving Iran billions of dollars in sanctions relief, giving Iran $6 billion for American hostages just weeks before the October 7th attacks, even though the administration says, oh, we froze it. All of these appeasement actions over the past 3 years is what leads us to today. The deterrence failure, Maria, doesn't happen overnight. It's 3 years of policies of chasing Iran around the world, begging them back in the JCPOA, and not even implementing U.S. sanctions that got us to where we are today.
Yeah, it's a great point. But look, Speaker, it even goes further than that. You've got a public fight with Bibi Netanyahu in plain sight, like in the public view, with Chuck Schumer saying we want new elections. You know, Netanyahu no longer serves the people of Israel, where, you know, even though Biden said, you know, our support of Israel is ironclad, he adds, but we will not be part of any retaliation to Iran.
Well, which apparently they told the Iranians. Look, you have an administration which, going all the way back to Obama and to John Kerry as Secretary of State, has consistently been pro-Iranian. They consistently have bent over backwards for the Iranians. They have tolerated Iranian proxies shooting at and killing Americans. They have tolerated the Houthis, who are backed by the Iranians. And no matter what the Iranians do, there's always one more excuse from Biden for American inaction. But again, imagine you're the Ayatollah. You're sitting there in Tehran. You just fired 300 missiles and other vehicles against Israel, and nothing happens. There are no consequences. I mean, you're going to think that these people are, beyond being paper tigers, you're going to think they're clowns, and that they have no sense of historical reality. And I think this is very, very dangerous.
Speaker Gingrich, you just came out with a new draft letter titled The American People versus Judicial Corruption. And you write this: President Donald Trump will walk into that courtroom as the champion of over 80 million Americans. He'll be fighting for the constitutional rights of all 341 million Americans. Tell us more.
Well, I think we have to understand this is a political trial in a way that we have really never seen in America. The case itself is totally ridiculous and would not stand up in any kind of honest court. Bragg is a total Democrat sellout. The judge is a total left-wing Democrat, and it's an effort to destroy a political opponent, something I don't think we've ever seen in American history. This kind of abuse of the law and violation of the Constitution. In a reasonable world, Trump would not be under trial, and I think, frankly, the case will ultimately be thrown out because it's based on a totally phony reinterpretation of the law. Bragg puts felons back on the street. He doesn't want to lock up anybody, even if they're a violent criminal. But now Donald Trump, that's different. Purely, totally political. And the key thing is, it's not just Trump walking in there. It is the champion of well over 80 million Americans who have consistently supported him, and he's fighting for the rights of all 330 million Americans to not have this kind of judicial abuse apply to them.
You know, I was talking to John Ratcliffe about this yesterday, and he said, look, there is a chance that there could be a hung jury. After all, he said 25% of the vote in New York will go to Trump. He believes 25%. I know that, you know, what we just heard a moment ago from Jonathan Turley, he said you can't find a Trump supporter there. But I wonder, and this is a worry that Ratcliffe brought up to me, Newt. He said, it worries me that the judge could be trying to weed out Trump supporters with the questions that he's asking in terms of putting that jury together. Do you worry about that?
Well, I assume that the judge will do everything he can to bias the case with everything from rulings to how they pick the jurors. You know, but I think you've got to start with the premise. This is totally phony. In the newsletter that I did at Gingrich 360, my whole point is this is a political trial of the champion of literally more than 80 million Americans. The whole case is totally phony. No serious lawyer thinks it's a reasonable case. And I cite in the newsletter lawyer after lawyer, left-wing lawyers, liberal Democrats, saying, as a matter of law, this case is ridiculous. And I think what you have is Alvin Bragg, as a left-wing professional Democrat, doing everything he can to rig the game, and the judge, who is a left-wing professional Democrat, doing everything he can to rig the game. But in the end, I have a hunch that they may get either to a hung jury or to an acquittal, because the facts of the case are so bad that at some point reasonable human beings just go, you know, I can't do this.
Newt, the administration is coming off sort of speaking out of both sides of its mouth. Yes, our support for Israel is ironclad, but by the way, we will not be part of any retaliation after 300 missiles and drones were shot at Israel.
Well, for some reason, both the Obama and the Biden administrations have had this fantasy that somehow we can become an ally of Iran and we can build a American-Iranian relationship which will stabilize the Middle East, which, of course, if you watch the Iranians, the Ayatollah went on TV about 2 months ago and said to the Iranian people, death to America is not a slogan. Death to America is Iranian policy. So it's pretty hard to see how they're going to deal with it. But I also want to say this morning, one of the most important things that should happen this week is that the House Republicans should get their act together with Democrats, whatever it takes. They need to pass aid to both Ukraine and Israel. It is well late, and I think it's time now to get it done. And this should certainly give them a sense of urgency about getting that money to our allies.
Yeah, but Speaker, should it be in the form of a loan to Ukraine?
Well, I think the Ukraine would take it as a loan. Look, FDR did that with Great Britain in World War II.
Okay.
There are a lot of ways to solve it. They just need to get the votes and get it done.
All right, we will leave it there. We will be right back. Welcome back. We are following the conflict in the Middle East, of course, all morning long. We've got final thoughts right now as Speaker Newt Gingrich. Final thoughts here this morning. We so appreciate your time.
I think this is a very important week for America to get its act together. I think passing the aid bill is extremely important. And I think that President Biden has to understand when you say don't, there have to be consequences when the others do. And I think he has to support Israel if they make a decision that this kind of all-out attack on their country requires some kind of counterattack.